Welcome to Starcanum, where we are obsessed with Star Wars Unlimited. I'm Ryan, and I am joined today by a top 16 Dr. Evazan that I won at my Planetary Qualifier this weekend. So today we're going to talk about how I did that. First, though, let me give a quick shout out to Millennium Games in Rochester, New York, who hosted the PQ that I attended. It was a long day, very demanding, but their staff and their facilities were top-notch. They handled all of the issues. Everything was clean and well-stocked and beautiful, and it was just a really great environment to enjoy competing at the highest levels that we have for Star Wars Unlimited right now. So again, big thanks to Millennium and everyone who put in the time and sweat to make that event run smoothly. You guys are great. All right, with that said, let's take a look at the deck that I used to make it into the top 16. I finished in 14th place overall with a lot of help here from Rey and her Jedi friends. So let's get right into it. Now, obviously, this list isn't exactly groundbreaking. I mean, Rey Tarkin Town has been a thing for a while, but I did make a few of my own adjustments here that I want to call attention to. Some were pretty smart and some were pretty dumb, so maybe you can learn from me and do even better than 14th place at your PQ. So off the top, we've got R2-D2, Restored Arc 170, the Green Squadron A-Wings, Sabine, and 2 copies of Quill, which I think makes 14 turn 1 plays overall, which is pretty important for this deck. You want to definitely stick something on the first turn. And the next turn, you're probably using Rey to give it an experience and or attacking into their turn 1 play, and then using Tarkin Town to just kill it. I found success using Tarkin Town as early as possible. I wanted to take control of the board immediately and then put my opponent on the defensive like as fast as I could. This had the upside of potentially stopping like a really aggressive deck like a Sabine from having a unit that they could hit with their wing leader or, give an upgrade to or something like that. So the sooner my Rey deck could take control of the battlefield, the more confident I became in my chances at victory. Now, that's not to say we only played like 2-cost units, right? There is a curve here. I've got Yoda and Village Protectors and a few copies of Tech, which also were very important to my overall strategy. Yoda is our cheapest Force unit, which activates stuff like Force Throw, which is really great, and he lets us get maximum value out of the Forces with me, which I've got 3 copies of, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But also, those Village Protectors can be upgraded with Rey, and it turns out a 2/2 Sentinel, maybe a 3/3 with a shield, becomes a nightmare for a lot of opposing decks to get through. So the Village Protectors kind of just really makes a nice roadblock and allows us to get into the later game where some of our bigger units can have more of an impact. I'm talking stuff like Kanan and K2, which are pretty classic 4-cost units for this type of deck, but I'm also running Razor Crest in here, which I don't see played very often. My logic being that extra 2 points of Restore can again help against an aggressive deck. Razor Crest is also statted in such a way that it can kill an A-Wing or Wing Leader or a lot of stuff. I mean, it can't make it through a Concord Dawn Interceptors, unfortunately. But the fact that it can also pick up an upgrade when we play it gives us just a little bit more card advantage, which this deck doesn't have a lot of otherwise. And so for the upgrades, I've got Luke's Lightsaber and Jedi Lightsaber. And in hindsight, I think I would have made both of these just Luke's lightsaber. I thought the Jedi lightsaber would be better to stick on Rey, give her more health to work with, but it's very expensive, and I never wanted to put it on like any other unit for fear of wasting a whole turn playing it and then getting waylaid or fell the dragon or something and just losing 2 cards. Whereas Luke's lightsaber was cheap enough that I wouldn't really care, and it's much easier to play Razor Crest, pick up Luke's lightsaber, and replay that often in the same turn. So saving that 1 resource for the cheaper lightsaber probably would have been a better idea. The top end of the deck has a single copy of Poe Dameron, because I only own 1 copy, and probably should have put more in here, but I was doing the best I could with what I had. Complementing him, though, was a copy of IG-11, who ended up being arguably more clutch than Poe. And then we've got 3 Obi-Wans, 2 Lukes, because again, I only own 2 Lukes, and then a single copy of Chewbacca, who was like a last-minute addition. Previously, I'd been running 2 IG-11s and the 1 Poe, so I turned 1 IG into a Chewie just so I would have something else that I could smuggle late game or have another good body that can also eat something when it shows up if the game does end up going that long. And then, of course, events. We've got Takedown, Fell the Dragon. Those are important, just answers to just about anything. And then 3 copies of Force Throw and 3 The Forces with me. Now, if we're already running Yoda, Kanan, Obi-Wan, and Luke, and Rey when she's deployed, that's a lot of Force units. We get really great value out of these. The thing you'll notice I am missing here, though, is Pillage, which I personally don't love. Like, when it works great, right? If you pluck the last 2 cards out of your opponent's hand and you're already ahead on board, it can be very hard for them to catch back up at that point. But there were so many times where I was drawing it too late to matter, or I was already behind on board and I didn't want to spend 4 resources attacking their hand when I would rather play a K2 or a Kanan and kind of try to stabilize on the ground. So I cut the pillages and instead ran just more copies of the Forces with me. And we'll talk about why that did or didn't work as we look at the sideboard. Now, at my local game store weekly events, we just play best of 1, so I didn't have a lot of experience playing best of 3, and this was the biggest competitive event I think I've ever really played in, certainly for Star Wars Unlimited, and I didn't have a great sideboard plan, so I just tried to, be ready for anything and work that into my general strategy. So the first thing I've got here are 3 copies of Concord Dawn Interceptors, which are excellent space units for just blocking smaller things like TIE Fighters, Lurking TIE Phantoms, even TIE Advanced, or opposing A-Wings, or whatever. And almost any game where my opponent had any sort of space happening at all, I would sideboard in all 3 copies of the Interceptors and take out my 3 copies of Razor Crest. Now, if my opponent did not seem to have much of a space game going on, or if they were more on an upgrade plan, or if they were like a Boba Fett deck and I was terrified of Boba Fett's armor, I would bring in my 2 copies of Disabling Fang Fighter, just so I had a way to pluck off those opposing upgrades while applying a bit more pressure of my own up in space. I've got 1 extra copy of K2 here. Remember, in the main deck, I only ran 2, and I went with 3 Kanan, figuring that the Force synergy with the Forces with me and Force Throw would be more valuable. But in any game where I felt like I did need to attack my opponent's hand or be more aggressive, thanks to K2's extra 3 damage plus his Overwhelm, I would swap one of the Kanans out to bring in this copy of K2. Then we get into my spicy meatballs here. I've got 2 copies of Smoke and Cinders, which I haven't really seen played anywhere, but I figured this would be a great card to have against some of the slower, grindier control decks. Something like a Bosk that was maybe doubling up the bounty that lets it draw extra cards and was just sitting on like a full grip going into the late game. I figured I could just make them discard all the way down to 2 and then maybe also hit them with like a Force Throw to take away whatever they saved out of that. But I never actually wound up siding these in. I just never played against a deck where it felt appropriate. But I'm still really curious to see if it would have worked in those matchups. And along similar idea lines, I had a single copy of Black 1 in here, which again, I don't really see played anywhere. But I figured in like a mirror matchup against another Rey deck that was attacking my hand with pillages and Force Throws, being able to play a Black 1 would let me draw 3 cards effectively for free. And then when it's defeated, I get 3 more. And even though stat-wise it isn't super great, I mean, it is still a 4-power, 4-health space unit, so it could do some work there. But I never actually found a chance to bring this one in either, so it will forever live in the I wonder if category. And then lastly, I had a single copy of Rivals Fall, and mostly I was bringing this in against leaders who I just could not deal with otherwise. Anytime I was up against a Boba Fett, and again was afraid of like the armor going on him, or if I ever got put up against somebody like Palpatine or something, or Darth Vader, somebody who was just really big and powerful and I needed a clean answer for, I would bring Rivals Fall in and take out usually one of the Forces with me to make the room for that. So that's my whole list. And again, the general strategy is to open with one of your cheap units, like an R2 or a Sabine. Next turn, you want to upgrade it probably with Rey. And in the case of Sabine, I really liked handing her Luke's lightsaber and like attacking for a ton of damage. But if you don't have that option available, you can sit behind a Village Protectors or Yoda and start banking up your force throws so that you can use those as both hand disruption and removal against your opponent's units. We kind of transition smoothly into the mid and late game after our early units have kind of bloodied our opponent's nose a bit. We start putting down stuff like Kanan and K2, maybe hitting harder up in space with Razor Crest while restoring whatever damage we've taken. And then as we enter the late game, we've got heavy hitters with Poe, IG-11, Luke, and Chewbacca. And really one of the best things you can do is play Obi-Wan on the 6 resource turn, and then you deploy your Rey, and now she's got a great Sentinel in front of her. And if they do kill Obi-Wan, he gets to put 2 experience on Rey, and you get to draw another card. And usually at that point, it's pretty much over. All you're really worried about is Rival's Fall on Rey. Otherwise, you're just attacking every turn for a bunch of damage, restoring a bunch of damage, and you just kind of snowball into an inevitable victory position. Worked out beautifully across the 7 rounds, and I couldn't have been happier. Now, that's not to say I never lost a game, right? I ended up going 5-2. My 2 losses were against a Boba Green and a Boba Yellow. So those are definitely some of the better decks in the format. And in hindsight, I should have had a better sideboard plan for those decks. One card that was missing is probably something like Mystic Reflection or Make an Opening, something that could actually answer a lurking TIE Phantom or, some of those other threats. A shielded 7th Fleet Defender also got a lot of good hits in against me because it would just tear through my A-Wings and my restored arcs and then pile on damage before I could find an answer for that. So having smaller pieces of removal rather than like holding takedown forever and using that to kill like a 3-cost space unit, that doesn't feel great. So I think in hindsight, I could have made room for a little bit better, more pinpoint removal for those specific threats. But otherwise, I was really happy with this list. And like I said, it performed well enough that I made it pretty deep into the Planetary Qualifier tournament. Now, if you want to hear like a more full breakdown of every matchup and how I sideboarded based on that, I'm going to type all that up and post it on Reddit, I think. So I'll post a link to that in the description under this video, and you can head over there and just kind of enjoy that at your own pace. Then make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the unlimited adventures we have here on Starcanum. May the Force be with you.